Before we sing some Christmas carols and begin the service tonight, I have some thoughts for you. Have you ever thought about all the mysteries associated with Christmas? Who makes the presents? How do reindeer fly? How do all the presents fit in Santa's sleigh? Do they transport sleighs to reload Santa's sleigh throughout the night like UPS trucks do? What makes Rudolph's nose shine so bright? What am I getting for Christmas tomorrow? How does Santa fit down the chimney? What are we having for dinner tomorrow? Am I going to get a puppy? Is there going to be world peace? It's a mystery. But all good mysteries have a good story to go with it. And this one is my favorite. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there rose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of a new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With the little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen. Oh, come, Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but he went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, and then turned with a jerk. And laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove over out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Let's sing some Christmas carols, some fun kid Christmas carols. And since we just did Santa and the Sleigh, let's start off with Rudolph. And I want to hear everybody sing along. Rudolph the red-nosed Who's coming to town? All right, let's sing Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
We welcome all of you to our church this evening. Tonight we're going to share some music, thoughts, and a story of Christmas with you. We are here this Christmas Eve to be together to feel the warmth of human bodies, a reassurance against the cold of this winter night. We come to fill our eyes with the lights of candles, to fill our ears with the sounds of music, to fill our hearts with the wonder of new hope. Hope for love of one another, hope for peace on earth with goodwill towards all. And give us this night that inner peace which comes from the knowledge that we're not alone, but that we're here, together, sharing common hopes, common dreams, and common resolutions. Give us this night the joy and wonder which fill our souls with the knowledge that we are part of the interweaving patterns of the human and the divine. Each of us is a spark of light in the universe. Together, a brilliance which calls forth the promise of Bethlehem. Together, may we find the courage to realize that promise. May it ever be so, and blessed be.
I light our chalice to remind us that Christmas is all about love, family, and children. It doesn't matter what we eat or what presents we get, as long as the holidays are spent with loved ones. This evening, our story of Christmas is The Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomey, written by Susan Wojciechowski. The village children called him Mr. Gloomy, but in fact his name was Toomey, Mr. Jonathan Toomey. And though it's not kind to call people names, this one fit quite well. For Jonathan Toomey seldom smiled and never laughed. He went about mumbling and grumbling, muttering and sputtering, grumping and griping. He complained that the church bells rang too often, that the birds sang too shrilly, and that the children played too loudly. Mr. Toomey was a woodcarver. Some said that he was the best woodcarver in the whole valley. He spent his days sitting at a workbench carving beautiful shapes from blocks of pine and hickory and chestnut wood. After supper, he sat in a straight-back chair near the fireplace, smoked his pipe, and stared into the flames. Jonathan Toomey was not an old man, but if you saw him, you might think he was. The way that he walked bent forward and his head down. You wouldn't notice his eyes, the clear blue of an August sky. And you wouldn't see the dimple on his chin, since his face was mostly hidden under a shaggy, untrimmed beard, speckled with sawdust and wood shavings. And depending on what he ate that day, with crumbs of bread or a bit of potato or dried gravy. The village people didn't know it, but there was a reason for his gloom, a reason for his grumbling, a reason why he walked hunched over as if carrying a great weight on his shoulders. Some years earlier, when Jonathan Toomey was young and full of life and full of love, his wife and baby became very sick. And because those days were the days before hospitals and medicines and skilled doctors, his wife and baby died 3 days apart from each other. So Jonathan Toomey packed his belongings into a wagon and traveled till his tears stopped. He settled into a tiny house at the edge of a village to do his wood carving. One day, in early December, there was a knock at Jonathan's door. Mumbling and grumbling, he went to answer it. And there stood a woman and a young boy.
What? Yes? What do you want?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm the widow McDowell. I'm new in your village. This is my son, Thomas.
I'm 7, and I know how to whistle.
Whistling is pish-posh.
I need something carved. Before I moved, I had a special set of Christmas figures that my grandfather had carved for me when I was a little girl. Once I moved and unpacked, I discovered that they were lost. I had hoped that by some miracle I would find them again, but it hasn't happened.
Well, there are no such things as miracles. Now, could you describe the figures to me?
There were sheep.
2 of them with curly wool.
Yes, 2, and a cow, an angel, Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus, and the wise men.
3 of them.
Will you take the job?
I will.
I'm grateful. How soon can you have them ready?
They'll be ready when they're ready.
But I must have them by Christmas. They mean very much to me. I can't remember a Christmas without them.
Christmas is pish-posh.
And he shut the door. The following week, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. Muttering and sputtering, he went to answer it, and there stood the widow McDowell and Thomas.
Excuse me, but Thomas has been begging to come and watch you work. He says he wants to be a woodcarver when he grows up and would like to watch you because you're the best in the valley.
All be quiet. You won't even know I'm here. Please, please.
With a grumble, the woodcarver stepped aside to let them in, and he pointed to a stool near his workbench.
No talking, no jiggling, no noise.
The widow McDowell handed Mr. Toomey a warm loaf of cornbread as a token of thanks, and then she took out her knitting and sat down in a rocking chair in the far corner of the cottage.
What? Not there. No one sits there.
So she moved to the straight-back chair near the fire. Thomas sat very still. Once, when he needed to sneeze, he pressed his finger under his nose to hold it back. Once, when he wanted desperately to scratch his leg, he counted to 20 to keep his mind off the itch. After a very long time, Thomas cleared his throat and whispered,
Mr. Toomey, may I ask a question?
The woodcarver glared at Thomas, then shrugged his shoulder and grunted. Thomas decided it meant yes, so he went on.
Is that my sheep you're carving? Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but you're carving my sheep wrong.
The widow McDowell's knitting needles stopped clicking. Jonathan Toomey's knife stopped carving, but Thomas went on.
It's a beautiful sheep, but my sheep looked happy.
Ah, that's pish posh. Sheep are sheep. They cannot look happy.
Mine did. They knew they were with the baby Jesus, so they were happy.
After that, Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. When the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Thomas and his mother thanked the woodcarver and left. That evening, after a supper of cornbread and boiled potatoes, the woodcarver sat down at his bench. He picked up the sheep. He worked until his eyelids drooped shut.
Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing song number 243, Jesus Our Brother. The words will be projected.
A few days later, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. Griping and grumbling, he went to answer it, and there stood the widow and her son.
Hello?
May I watch again? I will be quiet.
Thomas settled himself on the stool very quietly, while his mother laid a basket of sweet-smelling raisin buns on the table.
The teapot is warm.
While Mr. Toomey carved, the widow McDowell poured tea. She touched the woodcarver gently on the shoulder and placed a cup of tea and a bun next to him. He pretended not to notice, but soon both the plate and the cup were empty. Thomas tried to eat the bun his mother had given him as quietly as he could, but it's almost impossible to eat a warm, sticky raisin bun without making various smacking, licking, satisfied noises. When Thomas had finished, he tried to sit quietly. Once, he almost hiccuped. But he took a deep breath and held it till his face turned red. And once, without thinking, he began to swing his legs, but a glare from the woodcarver stopped him, and he kept them so still they fell asleep. After a very long time, Thomas whispered,
Mr. Toomey, excuse me, may I ask a question? Is that my cow you're carving?
Another very long time went by.
Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but I must tell you something. That is the most beautiful cow I have ever seen, but it's not right. My cow looked proud.
That's pish-posh. Cows are cows. They cannot look proud.
My cow did. It knew that Jesus chose to be born in his barn, so it was proud.
Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. The only sounds that could be heard were the scraping of the carving knife, the humming of the widow McDowell, and the click-clack of her knitting needles. When the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Thomas and his mother thanked the woodcarver and left. That evening, after a supper of boiled potatoes and raisin buns, the woodcarver sat down at his bench. He picked up the cow, and he worked until his eyelids drooped shut. A few days later, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. He smoothed down his hair as he went to answer it. At the door were the widow and her son.
May I watch again?
As Mrs. McDowell warmed the tea and put a plate of fresh molasses cookies on the workbench, Thomas watched the woodcarver work on the figure of an angel. After a very long time, Thomas spoke.
Mr. Toomey, excuse me. Is that my angel you're carving?
Yes. And would you do me the favor of telling me exactly what I'm doing wrong?
Well, my angel looked like one of God's most important angels because it was sent to baby Jesus.
And just how does one make an angel look important?
You'll be able to do it. You are the best wood carver in the valley.
After another very long time,
Mr. Toomey, excuse me. May I ask a question?
Do you ever stop talking?
My mother says I don't. She says I could learn about the virtue of silence from you.
under his beard, the woodcarver's face turned pink. The widow McDowell's face turned as red as a scarf she was knitting.
Well, speak up. What's your question?
Would you please teach me to carve?
Well, I'm a very busy man. You will carve a bird.
A robin, I hope. I like robins.
With a piece of charcoal, the woodcarver sketched a robin on a piece of brown paper. He handed Thomas a small block of pine and a knife. He showed him how to lop the corners from the block and slowly smooth the edges of the wood into curves. Thomas copied the woodcarver's strokes, head bent, tongue working from side to side on his lower lip as he concentrated. When the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Jonathan Toomey was holding Thomas's hand in his, guiding the knife along the edge of a wing. He didn't hear the church bell ringing. The widow McDowell said it was time to leave. Thomas brushed wood shavings from his shirt. Then he reached out and brushed 2 especially large pieces of wood shavings from Jonathan Toomey's beard.
Thank you for teaching me how to carve.
Later, after a supper of boiled potatoes and molasses cookies, Jonathan Toomey went to his workbench. He thought for a long time. He sketched drawing after drawing. Finally, he picked up the angel, and he carved until his eyelids drooped shut.
Please stand in body or in spirit and join us in singing our song number 231, Angels We Have Heard on High. The words will be projected.
Oh
few days later, there was a knock on the woodcarver's door. Mr. Toomey jumped up to answer it, and there stood the widow McDowell with a bouquet of pine boughs and holly sprigs dotted with berries. And there stood Thomas clutching his partly carved robin.
Hello, Thomas. Hello, Ms. McDowell.
Hello, I brought my robin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Toomey.
While Thomas and Mr. Toomey carved, Mrs. McDowell put the bouquet in a jar of water. She scrubbed Mr. Toomey's kitchen table and set the jar in the center on a pretty cloth embroidered with lilies of the valley and daisies, which she had found in a drawer below the cupboard.
Next, I will carve the wise men. Next, I will carve the wise men and Joseph. Thomas, perhaps before I begin, you will tell me about all the mistakes I'm going to make.
Well, my wise men were wearing their most wonderful robes because they were going to visit Jesus. And my Joseph was leaning over baby Jesus like he was protecting him. He looked very serious.
It wasn't until the church bells had chimed and the widow and her son were preparing to go that Mr. Toomey saw that the jar of pine bough and the scrubbed table and the cloth embroidered with the lilies of the valley and daisies.
I found the cloth in a drawer. I thought it would look pretty on the table.
Never open that drawer.
When the two had left, Jonathan put the cloth away. And that evening, after a supper of boiled potatoes, the woodcarver worked on Joseph and the wise men until his eyelids drooped shut. A few days later, there was a knock on the woodcarver's door. He dusted the crumbs from his beard and brushed the sawdust from his shirt. At the door were the widow McDowell and Thomas. All afternoon, Thomas watched the woodcarver work. As the evening approached and it was time to leave,
Thomas, I'm about to begin the last two figures, Mary and the baby. Can you tell me how your figures looked?
Oh, they were the most special of all. Jesus was smiling and reaching up to his mother, and Mary looked like she loved him very much.
Thank you, Thomas.
Tomorrow is Christmas. Is there any chance the figures will be ready?
They will be ready when they're ready.
I understand.
and she handed Mr. Toomey 2 packages.
Merry Christmas.
I want no presents.
That is exactly why we are giving them.
She put them down on the table and left. Jonathan sat down at the table. Slowly, he opened the first package. Inside was a red scarf, hand-knit, warm, and bright. He tied the scarf around his neck. The other package held a robin, crudely carved of pine. A smile twitched at the corners of Jonathan's mouth as he ran his fingers over the lopsided wings. He dusted the fireplace mantel with his sleeve and placed the robin exactly in the center so he could look at it from his chair. The woodcarver did not eat supper that day. Instead, he began to sketch the final figures, Mary and Jesus. He drew Mary, and then he wadded the sketch into a ball and tossed it on the floor. He drew the baby and wadded the sketch into a ball and tossed it with the first. Soon there was a small mountain of crumpled papers at his feet. He picked up a block of wood and tried to carve, but his knife would not do what he wanted it to do. He hurled the chunks of wood into the fireplace and sat staring into the flames. When he heard the church bells announcing the midnight Christmas service, he got up. Slowly, he opened the drawer beneath the cupboard, the drawer that he had told the widow never to open. From it, he took the cloth embroidered with lilies of the valley and daisies, and he took out a rough woolen shawl and a lace handkerchief. He took out a tiny white baby blanket and a little pair of blue socks. He placed each piece gently on the floor. From the bottom of the drawer, he lifted out a picture frame, beautifully carved of chestnut wood. In the frame was a charcoal sketch of a woman sitting in a rocking chair, holding a baby. The baby's arms were reaching up, touching the woman's face. The woman was looking down at the baby, smiling. Jonathan sat down in his rocking chair and held the picture against his chest. He rocked slowly, his eyes closed. 2 tears trailed into his beard. When he finally took the picture to his workbench and began to carve, his fingers worked quickly and surely, and he carved all through the night. Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing song number 237, The First Noel.
Worship
The next day, there was a knock on the widow McDowell's door. When she opened it, there stood the woodcarver, his neck wrapped in a red scarf, holding a wooden box stuffed with straw.
Mr. Toomey, what a surprise. Merry Christmas.
The figures are ready.
And from the box, Jonathan unpacked 2 curly sheep, happy sheep, because they were with Jesus. He unpacked a proud cow and an angel, a very important angel, with mighty wings stretching from its shoulders right down to the hem of its gown. He unpacked 3 wise men wearing their most wonderful robes edged with fur and falling in rich folds. He unpacked a serious and caring Joseph. He unpacked Mary, wearing a rough woolen shawl, looking down, loving her precious baby son. And Jesus was smiling and reaching up to touch his mother's face. That day, Jonathan went to the Christmas service with the widow McDowell and Thomas. And that day in the churchyard, the village children saw Jonathan throw back his head, showing his eyes as clear blue as an August sky, and laugh. No one ever called him Mr. Gloomy again. As we approach the time for our offering, give what you will for the church that has meant so much to you, for the church that has meant so much to those who came before you, and for the church that will mean so much to the people you will never know. Give what you will, for you are a generous people. Today's collection will go to the minister's discretionary fund to help members and friends in time of need. Electric candles have been distributed. You might want to discreetly check to make sure it works. There's a button on the bottom that you push to light it. If your candle does not work, you may ask for another. If you raise your hand, our helpers will see that your hand is rose. During the next reading, we will start lowering the lights, which will lead into Vera playing Silent Night. The words will be projected on the wall, but please remain seated so that everyone can see the words. Mike and I will walk down the aisles to light your candles, and then once your candle is lit, you can light your neighbor's candle while we all sing together in candlelight. We will then keep the candles lit through to the end of the service.
Christmas Eve is a time for candlelight. It is a time when one desires nothing more than family and soft music. Who can say what passes through our hearts on Christmas Eve? Strange thoughts, undefinable emotions, and sudden tears. All this and more, unbidden, come without reason. And we burn our candles for this on Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve is not just a time to be merry, but quietly glad. It is the proper time to wish upon a star. It is the time to watch children with excited, happy eyes troop off to bed to await the miracle of dawn. It is a time of wonder, of thankfulness that life is still being created anew out of darkness. It is a time of quiet awakening to the beauty that still lives on through the strife of a war-torn world. And we burn our candles, for this is Christmas Eve.
And Christmas Eve is a time of heartbreak when those who are not at their own fireside are most missed. Christmas Eve is also a time of blessing, when all the heartbroken world give thanks for the quiet beauty of rest. When one is closest to one's companions and is not then enemy to any person. And for this we burn our candles this Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve is a time of memory, when one remembers past happiness and love and often sighs for the good that might have been. Peace on earth, and now comes the memory of the story of the first Christmas, so old and yet so new. We lose ourselves in legend and dream of storybook people. Tiny Tim and the other wise man live again in the memory of human hearts. And we burn our candles, for this is Christmas Eve.
May the candles we light this holiday season remind us of the glowing love within the heart. May the carols we sing uplift our spirits and renew our hope and vision. May the special moments we spend with family and with friends strengthen the bonds of caring between us, between this time and throughout the coming year. May it ever be so, and blessed be you all. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry